For most of this week, Prime Minister Freundel Stuart and his CARICOM colleagues met behind closed doors here at Sandals Grand Antigua Resort and Spa to discuss a range of issues affecting member states. Stuart and the Barbados team led two of the major discussions, CARICOM's Commission on the Economy and the Commission on Reparations. The Prime Minister sat down with the Barbados media here to report on those talks and other matters that affect Barbadians at home. Prime Minister Stuart says dealing with the economic problems faced by Barbados and its regional neighbours was an important part of the first ever CARICOM 5-year strategic plan approved by leaders. He says the first step to recovery is stabilisation of these economies.
Barbados heads a CARICOM Commission on the Economy, which has been making representations to heads of government and so on the measures we might usefully put in place to deal with some of these challenges. But once we get past the stabilization issues, then there's the issue of releasing the creative energies of our people, enhancing and sharpening our competitiveness, and getting these economies back on a sustained growth path. So we talked some of those issues through. We then looked at our human resource constraints. Now this is very important because it is one of the best kept secrets in this region that after putting all of the educational opportunities that we have put at the disposal of our young people, that only about 22% of our secondary school children are able to succeed at levels that would guarantee them some secure employment in our respective countries. That's a daunting statistic. It's a troubling statistic. So we have taken the decision that we have to look back at what has been happening in education. Have we been doing the right things, and have we been doing the right things in the right ways? Because unless we build our human resource capital, unless we enrich our human capital, the developmental trusts that we aim at will be cheated of fulfillment.
Stuart says CARICOM's strategic plan does not call on Barbados to do anything that it's not already doing or trying to do. While it's not a usual occurrence, the leaders had talks with the head honchos in the region's private sector, and Stuart says they were concerned about a few things, including the cost and time it takes to do business in the Caribbean.
So we were able to attract leading private sector officials from Barbados, Trinidad and Tobago, Jamaica, other parts of the region, to help us to understand as governments where they were seeing, the members of the private sector were seeing challenges to their ability to deliver in the areas of producing for this region. The story was the same. Of course, the whole issue of business facilitation, the fact that there was not enough harmonization in the region so that businessmen functioning in Barbados found themselves having to deal with rules that were different from the ones who wanted to function in Trinidad and Tobago, and then if you went to Jamaica, something else. So they called for a higher level of harmonization so that it could make doing business across the region a little more seamless. There's always the issue of taxation. Until all taxes are abolished, everybody's overtaxed. And that continues to be a disabling feature of doing business in the region. And then, of course, the whole issue of bureaucracy, the red tape through which you have to go across the region to get business decisions. This is not going to change overnight because, of course, until we harmonize our procedures across the region, then we're not going to get rid of that complaint. Because even if a businessman has a good experience in one territory, when he goes to the other and that experience is reversed, you'll hear the complaint again. So as heads of government, we have to sit down and determine how best we can harmonize our procedures so that businesses that want to invest and to do business can be facilitated, be able to do it a lot more seamlessly than is at present the case. I must tell you frankly that I am not brimful of optimism that we'll ever get rid of this complaint, because I think that rules tend to be a little troublesome no matter in what area of life you're functioning. And as long as people have to follow procedures and to meet certain requirements and so on, and timelines have to be put in place, you will continue to get these complaints. What we have to do is to keep them down to a minimum so that people can get on with what they want to do. It is not only the private sector, though, on which we have to rely. We also have to rely on labor. And we are planning, therefore, a similar exchange between heads of government and the labor movement in the very near future, so that having heard from the private sector, we can hear from labor, and labor, the private sector, and governments working together, we can make the Caribbean a better place for everybody. So that was a very useful exchange, and of course, it is not a one-off thing, because what we agreed on was that from time to time, we should have these summits between private sector leaders and heads of government, so that we are always in tune with their problems and their expectations, and they can always be in tune with our challenges, our needs.
The health of the region's population was also a matter of concern, and in particular, the prevalence of chronic non-communicable diseases. Stuart says it's a big problem for Caribbean countries, and Barbados is an example of how bad things have become.
In any room where there are 10 people sitting down, 8 of those persons will die from some chronic non-communicable disease. That's the reality now. And if you look at expenditure in our health sector, between 60 and 65 cents out of every dollar is spent on some chronic non-communicable disease. Now, if you have a health profile like that, that is bound to have implications for productivity at the workplace. It is bound to have implications for engagement at the workplace. So in Barbados, when, for example, the National Initiative for Service Excellence did a survey about 2 years ago and discovered that whether you're talking private sector or public sector, about 33% of the people who go to work every day are really disengaged. That is a troubling statistic as well. But all of that has to be evaluated within the context of the incidence of chronic non-communicable diseases in Barbados and in other parts of the Caribbean. Diabetes, hypertension, cancers, obesity, these things are wreaking havoc on our people in this region. So we have to get into the realm of preventive health care, where our people adopt healthier lifestyles, and this has to be a crusade across the country. So in terms of what Barbados has to do on that issue, I intend to make sure that the entire country is mobilized on that issue of health and wellness, because the status quo is totally unsatisfactory. In fact, the status quo is daunting.
Also during the summit, it was agreed that a commission on marijuana would be established. The Prime Minister spoke about his position on the matter.
Barbados does not produce marijuana, as far as I'm aware. And certainly, if we do that in commercial quantities, I wish I could say we don't consume it. I would not be so daring to say that. But yes, that came up, and it's an issue that the region is looking at very closely. Truth to tell, I don't know that it is an issue that we're going to be able to run away from indefinitely. In certain parts of the United States, marijuana is gaining increasing respectability. And you know what happens to us here in the Caribbean is this. We are told what is sinful, and we believe those who tell us so. But they tell us these things so that it gives them enough time to get not only a comparative advantage, but also a competitive advantage. And as I understand what I'm hearing from heads of government, there seems to be an ironclad determination to ensure that we are not tricked again. I am prepared for the time being to listen to the experts. I am neither producer nor consumer. I don't know, though, that we're going to have to wait too long for results on this. I can tell you that the producer countries are chomping at bit to get this whole issue resolved and get a decision on it. So I must caution you against pessimism that you're going to have to wait too long, not at all.
Another controversial topic was reparations. Stuart heads the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations, and he insisted that Barbados, like others in the Caribbean, is still hurting from slavery, and there should be no shame in efforts towards getting compensation.
I was just telling you about education. I'm just telling you about health. You asked me about agriculture. All of these things have legacies. Our problems in all of these areas are legacies of the slave experience. Now, I know it is fashionable in Barbados, whenever you start to talk about slavery, for the purists to ask, but why are you going so far back? That was finished long ago. Now, the same people who ask that question go to church on Sundays, and the priest talks about Adam and Eve, and they don't think he's going too far back. He talks about Hezekiah, they don't think he's going too far back. He talks about Daniel in the lion's den, that's not too far back. And I could go on. Ahab and Jezebel, not too far back. But if you talk about slavery just 150 years ago, you say you're going too far back. The stage has been reached where we have to settle this issue. Now, let's be very frank about it. European nations, slave-owning nations, have been doing their best, according to their lights, to contribute to our developmental efforts in the Caribbean. We've enjoyed preferences on European markets. We have had, in our trading arrangements, for example, we've had 4 Lomé conventions, and we've had a Cotonou agreement, and now we're into an economic partnership agreement and so on. And we get aid out of the European Development Fund and so on. And we have got various forms of technical assistance and that kind of thing. So we're not here talking about a diplomacy of anger and protest. What we're saying is that upwards of 200 years after the abolition of the slave trade, and just under 200 years after the emancipation of slaves themselves, we are still chronically underdeveloped. we are still facing huge challenges. And we are still, in fact, we are now crushed by debt. We are now overwhelmed by deficit. We're facing educational challenges, health challenges, and in many respects, we're facing challenges of normlessness. We have sections of our societies that do not feel any effective part of the mainstream of the society. We are dealing here with a legacy. The average centenarian in Barbados today, that centenarian's grandmother or great-grandmother was a slave. So it's not too far away. And we're saying that this thing has left some scars, and we want to talk about it. This is not a diplomacy of protest. It's a diplomacy of engagement. And the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations is taking the view that what we need to do is to engage those European nations most obviously involved in slavery and the slave trade as it affected the Caribbean, to see what agreements we can reach in terms of how they can enhance the effort they're making in our societies so that we can be rid of some of the asymmetries, some of the disequilibria, social and economic, that have been afflicting our societies since emancipation. We don't expect, because we're not that starry-eyed, that these nations are going to jump up and shout, mea culpa. They're not going to say, we plead guilty, what's the sentence? No, that's not going to happen. We expect that this is something we have to work through. We're not working through it in anger. We're working through it in a civilized way because we have good relations with these nations. Barbados' principal source market for tourism is the United Kingdom. We have a good diplomatic relationship with the Kingdom of Spain. We have excellent relations with the Netherlands. We have a good relationship with France, even though from time to time France labels us as a tax haven for offshore purposes, but we understand that. These are the little skirmishes that you have to endure in international relations.
Reporting from the 35th CARICOM Heads of Government Conference in St. John's, Antigua, I'm Dawn Paris for Barbados Today.